Well, thank you very much. I thank you all for coming. This is an important topic. Before we start, I'd like to know, obviously you guys in uniform, I know what you do. How many people are from the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base? How many people are looking at getting a CMMC assessment? Just you? Okay. And those of you in the military or government, if you're in your last years of service, this is a pretty good gig to work on as a consultant or as a W-2 employee. It's got a lot of growth. I'm here in and out because I'm working on 2 assessments as we speak. So I want to introduce us a little bit. Two of our folks couldn't make it. One guy got stuck in California, but we knew that was happening. Our other fellow tried to fly out of DCA last night and had about 13 hours of delays before he had canceled his flights. But we're gonna fill in for that. My name is Dan Turacini. I was an early adopter into the ecosystem. I got my provisional instructor and provisional assessment about 4 years ago or so. I've taught a lot of CCPs and CCAs, so it's been real rewarding. Being a guy over 65, a lot of the students are in their late 30s, early 40s, so it gave me a lot of interaction with the new people, the new strength in our area here. I also have put together a training program that I do, not only role-based training, but I also work as an ATP and a provisional instructor. So if you're interested in pursuing a CCP or a CCA environment, you don't have to come to me, but I can talk to you about what you need to do, what some of the prerequisites are, and what you may want to see as going forward. Here we have represented by 2 different parts of the ecosystem right now. Fernando is a CEO of a C3PAO. I think he's probably the leading assessment organization in the ecosystem right now. He's probably done the most of that's happened so far. And then to his right is Greg Manson. Greg is a division head for TAGO, and he is in charge of their RPO requirements. So an RPO is typically somewhere you go to get consulting services to help you prepare for becoming certified. And in the assessments I've done, some DIBCAC assessments before January and then many since January. Not enough people are going to get help, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Our focus today is on lessons learned, what we learned over the last 6 months or so on what companies are coming to the table with, where they're falling short, why they may be falling short, and how we can help them. So just a little bit about the problem. I'm not going to read too much into this, but you can read the slide. We are losing a lot of money, not only in the DIB, but throughout our supply chain, all our supply chain, all the goods and services that come into the country, flow across the country, all the manufacturing, everything you can think of. From a DIB perspective, the one thing we have to understand as contractors in the DIB is that we're putting our warfighters at risk. And it's not the risk of the company that is the most important piece of this. It's the risk to our warfighters. It's the risk to the intellectual property of our Department of Defense. And, of course, diminishing our global advantage. And if you take the course, you'll see we compare the F-35 and the J-22 out of China. We did years and years of research, years and years of development, and they replicated it almost to spec within months. And we lost the advantage of having an advanced fighter very quickly. And that's all over the place with different parts of the industry. So I do a little what if. The big what ifs are, what if somebody messes with some specification or some clearances or requirements for bolts? Could that cause a tail wing that happened not too long ago to fall off an aircraft? What about GPS spoofing? That's becoming big in the news now. We don't know. We don't have definitive proof of some of the problems we've seen with GPS spoofing. But a fellow who was in the Naval Reserve for 10 years, spent a lot of time down at Norfolk Naval, and I am also a merchant mariner, and I know about all the LNG ships that come up through the channel to get up to the LNG port. If somebody took an LNG ship and misdirected it, and it's not very hard to do, it causes a lot of damage to our fleet in Norfolk. So there's a lot of different things that can happen in our ecosystem for the DoD perspective. But I want you also to focus on your own perspective. You know, you make a living off of the defense industrial base, if you're in that space. Your business is important to you, it's important to your employees, and maybe you can think of CMMC not just as another thing that the government has make you do, but maybe you can think about it how you can clean your own shop a little bit. Everybody knows that they're lacking in cybersecurity. Everybody knows that they're lacking in the things they need to do. 171 R2 is not a real heavy lift, and that's somebody I was, my company was under a program of record. My data center and my services were under FSMA for many, many years, starting in, I think, 04 through about when I left in 16. Much more complicated, much more complex, a lot more to do. CMMC and 171 is a much lighter weight, but a good start. And you're going to benefit it not only for benefiting the government, but also from benefiting your own internal systems. So what are we doing wrong? So there is a bunch of documentation. This is all located at the defense.gov CIO site, resources and documentation. There's a lot of documentation, and you should be able to download these slides off of the website for the conference. But I'm going to focus on two in particular, because there's two major things you have to do to get through this wicket. First, you have to have a scoping. Scope out your environment. What does that mean? You need to know where all your assets are and what of your assets actually will touch, process, store, or transmit CUI and FCI. We're going to focus on CUI today. And then everybody says, well, you know, there's a lot of stuff in 800-171. It's not clear. If you were doing self-assessments about a half a dozen years or so ago, you probably only looked at 800-171 R2. Nobody knew there was an assessment guide attached to that. 171 is at a pretty high level. The assessment guide talks about all the objectives and what you might do and what you might want to get done to meet those objectives and to meet the requirements of 171. So what the DoD did in their wisdom is they took those two documents and put them all together. So everything in 800-171 R2 and everything in the assessment guide 171A is all put together in one place. And they're telling you, what are we looking for? The details of what we're looking for under each practice, what kinds of things and documents and evidence you are going to need to show us that you're conforming with the requirements, how your infrastructure can be set up and work, and what kind of examples you can use. And we're going to show you that throughout this and talk about this throughout this presentation. So you need to identify the scope, and I talked about that in a higher level. But you need to know what your assets are. And it's the assets, mainly the assets that process, store, and transmit the CUI. But it's also the assets that protect those assets, the security protection assets. There are some other assets involved. We don't have to go into that detail, but they talk to auxiliary type of support, things that aren't always online, things that you can do with risk management controls and stuff like that. But you got to get your primary systems inventoried, and then you have to know how all of your data flows through these systems. And of course, your systems protection assets, whether they're a SIM or some other asset, your firewalls, maybe they're not processing, storing, and transmitting directly, but they have a role in there. Some of them have data that can be used to expose or infiltrate your system. So you have to know where everything is, and then you want to start separating your systems that are going to be involved with CUI and your systems that are not. One of the ones I usually, as an obvious example, is voice over IP. Now, a lot of people have already done that, but voice over IP can be a very vulnerable environment. So don't put your voice over IP network on the same network you're processing, storing, and transmitting CUI, if you can do that, if there's a way to do that. And there are other examples, and as you go through the documentation, you'll see what those examples are. And separation, both physical and logical separation, is a really good technique to bring your scope down to a manageable level. Remember, the DoD is only concerned with you protecting CUI and FCI. Now, if you're going to use this to all these concepts to also protect your intellectual property and your own business practices, that's great. But the DoD is focused on those specific CUI and FCI transactions. And in the guide, you can see here are the 5 different assets that can be assessed. One of the things is you're not only going to identify these 4 primary assets, the controlled unclassified information assets, the security protection assets, those that you're going to do contractor risk management, and then specialized assets like GFE and stuff like that. But you're also going to have to list all your out-of-scope assets, because we want to see where that demarcation is, and as an assessor, between your daily business and your DIB business. And we want to see that you're doing very good separation, right? And the only way to get something out of scope is to separate it from your primary network that processes, stores, and transmits CUI. And then before we begin the inventory, we want to catalog, we want to determine sensitive information, where it moves through the system, and then identify the systems and enabling systems that are going to be in scope. And what we don't want to do as an assessor is find things that are in scope that are not listed in your in scope assets. And we don't want to find scope information that should be in scope outside of or deemed out of scope. And some of these people have done this by mistake. Some people have tried to hide in scope assets. And I don't know that it was exactly malicious, but they were, one case somebody told me, Well, we're going to retire that within the next 2 years, so we didn't think we needed assessed. Well, what about what goes on within the next 2 years? The other document is the assessment guide. This is the level 2 assessment guide, which most of you will be involved with. If you're going to do your self-assessment, that's a level 1 assessment guide. But as you can see here, we start with the practice. But the practice isn't the whole story, right? The practice is not vague, but it's very high level. Now, from the assessment guide, we bring in these objectives. Some of the practices have only one objective. It's kind of a repeat of the practice. But many of them have 3, 4, 5, many objectives. And because we have these objectives because when I was doing self-assessments for some companies back around 5 or 6 years ago, they would look at the practice around a table and they would say, John, do we do that? And the guy said, yeah, we kind of do that. But it's not inclusive. You know, you may be doing certain access control requirements for your servers, but not doing them for the workstations. So there's different things that we got to look at. So we want to look at it in depth at that level of granularity. And then we provide potential assessment methods. What are we as assessors going to look for, right? So this is like, we used, at the academy I went to, we used to call us a pony, right? We're giving you potential answers. We're giving you the information you need to show us. So take the effort to take advantage of this information and put it into a format, put it into a way that it justifies and shows us clearly what you are doing. And then when you're providing evidence to us, don't point to a 500-page document that we have to roll through to find out where you're actually answering that question. Give us your the document, give us the page number, give us the paragraph. Point exactly to the process, the policy, and the procedure that addresses each objective, and you will be graded at the objective level. What does that mean? Well, in this case, we have, we have 6 objectives. If you got a not met on one of those objectives, that entire practice is not met. So if you're doing stuff for servers, but you're not doing it for your workstations, you're out. And you'll learn that there are 4 kinds of grades that can be applied to each practice. Normally they're 1. There's a lot of 1-pointers, so you'll lose a point. But some of the more important practices are 3 points and 5 points. So you can get a negative score very quickly. It's very hard to dig out of a negative score. And if you don't meet one of the 3 or 5, you only need one of those to kick you out of an assessment. They'll go through maybe and complete the assessment, but you can't pass an assessment. You can't do a poem on any of the 3 or 5. So then we have some discussions, and again, some of them come out of Rev 2, and some of the further discussions come out of the assessment guide. They give you examples of what you might do. And these are, we're not saying do exactly what the example does, but read the example. Understand what we're looking for. I mean, this is getting through university. This is getting your master's degree, maybe. This is going to school 101. What does the professor want to hear? What are they looking for? Now, you don't want to just regurgitate, and I've seen that too. I've seen regurgitation of somebody else's work, and it didn't match the scope. It didn't match what was going on in their infrastructure, right? So you need a synergy between the answers you put here and the network diagrams you put at the beginning of your SSP. So that's kind of a study guide of what we're supposed to do. Okay, So we're going to go to our speakers. Again, I'm going to fill in with Toby. We're going to start with Fernando. Again, he is the CISO at CyberSec Investments. He's done a lot of and is leading a lot of the assessments for his organization and has a lot of experience. I'll go to your slides, Fernando.
All right, so Fernando Machado, Managing Principal and CISO at CyberSec Investments. Like Dan said, I am a lead CMMC certified assessor, and we're an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization located in Melbourne, Florida. Want to go to the next slide? All right, so for those of you that don't know, the CMMC program rule has two parts to it. The first part, there's a 32 CFR Part 170, which went into effect in December, that establishes the entire CMMC program as a whole across the entire Department of Defense. The accompanying rule, the 48 CFR rule, i.e. what's going to be the DFARS clause that will go into a contractor's contract, is currently at OMB and is expected to be completed sometime in the fall, give or take. So when that 48 rule goes into effect, the DoD has put out a 4-phased approach on how these requirements will apply to the defense industrial base. Phase 1 begins immediately upon the effective date of the 48 rule, and the DoD intends to include CMMC Level 1 and CMMC Level 2 self-assessments. However, there's another sentence in that paragraph that states DoD at its discretion can require a Level 2 third-party assessment in place of a Level 2 self-assessment. So put your contracting officer hat on. What would give you greater assurance about your supply chain meeting the requirements? Would you allow them to continue to keep self-assessing and self-attesting, or require third-party verification? Then 1 year after that, from that date, we begin the CMMC Level 2 third-party assessments. And something that folks need to understand about this phased rollout is the phased rollout applies to the primes. They do not apply to the subs, meaning if you are a sub to a prime, your rollout could potentially be faster because there's nothing stopping a prime from saying, hey, CMMC is out now, go get a Level 2 cert because you work for me and not DoD. Go ahead, next slide. All right, go ahead and hit next. I think there's some animation here. Yep, there we go. So earlier this year, the DoD put out a memo on how the CMMC requirements are going to apply to the various companies in the defense industrial base. And one of the first things that you see here is these are going to be the minimum requirements, the minimum CMMC levels per company, depending on the type of data that you're handling. But you notice that that line right there states that that it's basically the bare minimum, and there's nothing precluding them from going above and beyond. Go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so here, if you are in the defense industrial base handling controlled unclassified information in the CUI registry's defense organizational index grouping category, meaning controlled technical information, naval, nuclear, and so forth, the minimum will be a CMMC Level 2 third-party assessment. Yep, next. All right, so go ahead, next slide. Yep, so all of those CUI categories right there, if you are in the defense industrial base handling one of those CUI data types, the CMMC Level 2 third-party assessment will be the bare minimum requirement. All right, so in the 32 CFR Part 170, there's different things. So under CMMC 1.0, POAMs were not allowed. You had to have everything at 100% at the time of assessment. It was either pass or fail. Now with CMMC 2.0, there is going to be some areas where you are allowed to have POAMs. So you're allowed to have a POAM as long as the following conditions are met. So 1, go ahead, next slide, Dan. 1, you score at least 80% or 88 out of the 110 controls. 2, it's either you cannot have any controls that are 3 or 5 point valued controls that can go on your POAM. And 3, these are the subset of 1 valued controls that cannot go onto your POAM. So if you meet those 3 criteria, next slide. If you meet those 3 criteria, what will end up happening is you will have what's called a conditional CMMC Level 2 certification, and you'll have 180 days to close out those POAM items. Then once you close those POAM items out, your certificate will be upgraded from a CMMC Level 2 conditional cert to a CMMC Level 2 final certificate. All righty. When it comes to scoping highlights, one of the things that gets people off guard is architectural or boundary changes. So if you go through an assessment with a managed service provider or with a cloud service provider, and after that assessment is done, you have significant architectural or boundary changes, you're going to trigger a new assessment. And go ahead, next slide. And if it changes, if you look at that last bottom slide right there, if it changes, it says the scope is basically the assessment is no longer valid and a new assessment will be required. So you're going to invalidate your Level 2 certificate if you have some significant boundary or changes. And that pretty much wraps up my session.
And I'll just add that if you listen to the news or LinkedIn, the Army has already announced that they are prepared to start putting CMMC requirements in the solicitation starting October 1st. So
Yep.
they're on board with this, and OMB is right at the end of its review period. So we should see that pop out. We might be popping out while we're talking. Next, I have Greg Mann.
Dan.
What's up?
Fernando, you didn't mention the change in ESP. So there may be changes with the infrastructure, the design that requires a new assessment. The ESP, that actually has long-term consequences
Right.
in selecting the right ESP that you want to potentially be spending 10 years with.
Yep. Yeah, what Greg's talking about is external service providers. So if you have a managed service provider handling your organization or you're leveraging a particular cloud service provider and you make any changes, you're going to trigger a new assessment. And so this is why we say, right, kind of like marriage, for better or worse, you have a 3-year cycle to make sure you think those things ahead of time so that you're not having to pay for another assessment. And it's one thing to pay for another assessment, it's something else completely different. Like right now in the entire ecosystem, I think Dan can attest to, there's not enough assessors and there's definitely not enough C3 PAOs. So when this 48 rule kicks off and you have a significant change within your first year, there's no telling if we may even have the availability to even come back and do a reassessment for you.
Okay, we're going to try to just go through M&S Group's slides real quickly. M&S is another C3 PAO. They got a lot of experience and also a lot of professionals and assessors on board. And I mentioned earlier, you can be an assessor as a W-2, but right now, because things are a little lean, a lot of C3 PAOs are also using 1099 folks to do this. So the point of this is planning process. If you have not spent any time with the documents, if you have not spent any time really paying attention to your overall infrastructure and your overall controls, you're not going to be ready overnight for an assessment. Unfortunately, some people think this is a paper drill. It is not a paper drill. We are looking for evidence at, like I said, the objective level. That evidence can come in the form of documentation, but that's only one piece. You need 2 forms of evidence at least, and that comes through demonstration. In other words, you might show me a procedure, and you might show me a screenshot of the end of that procedure. I'm going to want to see somebody who does this on a daily basis sit behind a keyboard and show me what you do. Now, I'm not looking at your data. I'm not looking for, whether you're classifying things right or wrong or anything like that. I'm just looking to see that the people that you have trained, the people that are doing your continuous training, are following the procedure as stipulated. They're doing what the company needs to be done to be compliant. And then I can also do that with interviews. I can talk to individuals and ask them, okay, you get this, you do scenario thing, I don't have to be in front of a computer. And that might be with things like business continuity, incident response, and stuff like that. What do you do next? How do you what is your call out? How do you get a hold of people? because you want to make sure that people are knowing what they need to do very quickly. And then remember the supporting documents, and I mentioned this earlier. They can be a screen share, they can be a document, they can be other types of artifacts, but make it clear. Make sure that you are giving the assessor something that I'm looking at it, I don't have to flip and try to find where your evidence really meets the requirement. Show me exactly where the evidence meets the requirement. Because remember, some of these assessments are going to be done on time and material basis. Some of them may be done on a firm fixed price. But if we go over, they're going to be knocking on your door for a modification to the requirement. Do you have anything to add to that as a C3PAO?
No, I mean, everything that you're saying is 100% accurate.
Boy, oh boy.
I want to leave enough
I never heard
for
that
Q&A.
before. Okay, now on the other side of that, so we talked a lot about what do you need to do? Where can you get help? So the ecosystem created this RPO program, registered professional organizations. A lot of them are cloud resellers, right? Some of them are very high-tech, capable cybersecurity professionals. Greg Manson is one of those. Tego is one of those. They bring on folks like myself as CCPs and CCAs also to help with the process as well. I encourage every organization at least have one or two people go through the CCP, because the CCP class. They don't have to take the test, but everything I'm talking about are what you got to look for, what you need to provide to the assessor. That's all covered in the CCP class. The assessment class goes more into the assessment part, but what to look for is all in that CCP class. So if you don't know what the questions are going to be, it makes your job a lot easier. So Greg, let's start with your presentation.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we're Tego, we make the sausage. And I do want to query the group again. I saw a few hands, but seriously, don't be embarrassed. Who's OSC, organization seeking compliance? I know I saw at least one, two. Okay, so thank you very much. Tego is, as Dan said, there's two sides to the ecosystem, and we're wholly bought in on the implementation side, and that comes from the rest of our business. We're a VAR, an IT engineering company that have good relationships with product vendors and skilled engineers that can help you address specific things that you need to do to address gaps that you might have in your environment. And we can do it all within the code of ethics that's been built by the ecosystem for us to be on your side. We're actually a wholly owned part of your team. And as we get in and now have been doing this for 4+ years as an RPO, find ourselves essentially, and in some cases, the whole GRC team, but an augmentation to the governance, risk, and compliance team that's responsible for making it or getting an organization compliant. It's different than what you see, and I'm going to just get into a little bit of the nuance. So you'll hear things, who's heard of an enclave? So conceptually, it's a walled off area where you put protected information, right? And it's a great concept. I'll get into that a little bit more, but what we're seeing are organizations that will carry the RPO moniker and go along with their enclave so that they can offer both of those services as one thing. And I'd like to challenge that because we're not a designated enclave provider. We're an IT engineering company. We do other certifications like ISO 27001. We're all information systems auditors, and we can bring to the table a much more fruitful engagement with the enclave. And it all comes down, and I still use the term SRM, Fernando. I think that's not hip anymore, right? It's CRM. So, dude,
Yeah, the customer responsibility matrix.
yeah, which is essentially all 320 control objectives that Dan discussed, enumerated in columns with an X next to who's responsible for that control objective. And the position we have by not providing the enclave and also being the RPO and strictly being the RPO trying to help you implement that framework is we can go through and enforce that. We can audit that. We're, as I said, auditors. We can make sure that we're getting evidence to support that. You know, we're going to go over some common problems that we see. A lot of them are just trusting the enclave or the ESP, the external service provider, to be addressing those controls. And no one's actually keeping an eye on them until it's too late, until they've scheduled Fernando to come in and they're not ready to go into the scoping, and Fernando has to reschedule and he's not happy. He's a nice guy, but he gets really ugly when he has to reschedule, right?
Yeah.
So some other things, the ecosystem bridge builders, that's a thing. So we are part of the team. We'll be there through thick and thin and up to when the C3PAO comes in, even help you select the C3PAO. Tego offers an internal audit, which is something that you have to understand. And you'll see a graphic at the end. Everybody's looking at, let's get certified so we can keep our contracts. And here's a news flash. You got to stay compliant. You're going to have to stay compliant forever. And you're going to have to get reassessed periodically. You need to have somebody, if you don't have it on your team, somebody brought in to be able to manage that process for you. And that's if you have an enclave or not. You still have 320 control objectives. You need somebody that's going to keep their eyes on it. That's what Tego does. And we have relationships with LTPs and C3PAOs, so we can help you find the right solutions and providers for your various needs. I don't necessarily like to say we're tailored for small, medium-sized. What we're seeing, we've got 3 organizations that are foreign-owned with U.S. subsidiaries. And they are having to break off the U.S. subsidiary and protect the information for various reasons, but mostly just logistics and engineering-wise, it makes sense. To do that, you may have a $1 billion company, foreign international company, but the units that we're dealing with are a small IT team here domestically. So it actually kind of fits into that small, medium-sized business. But we can work with anything. And also, if you are a small or medium-sized business, and the 2 OSCs that I see here, I'm not sure how large you are, we'll actually talk about the business case. And just this morning, we had a customer that we'd been working with, and honestly, and this is what RPOs do. CMMC, from where you're at to where you need to be, is going to cost you this amount of money. And then on an annual basis, it's going to continue to cost you money. Does that justify the contract that you have that you need that's requiring CMMC? And I got the email today. No, we're going to diverge that business unit because it just doesn't make sense for us to incur the cost to be compliant just to keep that amount of business. And we're not confident we can grow it in a way to actually justify the cost. That's a real thing that's happening. We're having those conversations. And not just that, Fernando and I were also talking this morning. If it's not that, it's M&A and companies spinning that off to organizations that can do that.
Yep.
And then the framework agnostic approach, as I said, a lot of our customers have beholden to other regulations, right? So you got a big company, they may not just be doing DIB work, they may be doing energy work. So we've got NERC. They have other stakeholders that are wanting them to be more secure. So we'll, prescribe and implement ISO. And there's the security control framework and the unified control framework that you can work within to kind of crosswalk the stuff you're doing in CMMC over to those frameworks. We do that all the time. So we do a lot of SOC 2 and ISO work as well. And that's an important piece because you kind of get more bang for your buck for that investment. Fair warning, they're not one for one. And those control objectives don't directly translate to ISO. And the SSP is not your ISMS. But, so an organization like Tego with that experience has that awareness and will help you navigate the process. Oh, yeah. Fernando talked about the phased rollout. It is imminent, although I thought I quoted you on, maybe it was the Summit 7 guys saying October 1st, thinking the federal start of the federal.
Yes, the October 1st date is a CMMC 1.0 language that's still in there. No one knows when the phase rollout is going to go. However, being that the DFARS, that 48 rule is such a short rule, and given on average, you're looking anywhere between the end of the fall to the beginning of early of next year. So you have that window, depending on how quickly OMB gets through it.
Which is actually the start of that slide that you
The start of the phased rollout.
So I like to say, hey, regardless of that, you got so much work to do. If you're like a typical organization that we get involved with, don't be debating or procrastinating. Get in and get started right away.
Yeah.
The effort is huge. It's always surprising. It's oftentimes under prioritized at the start. So we're having to pull, trying to get the OSC to actually work on building controls, giving us evidence, getting a picture of their environment. And then it's panic. So start early, give it a routine priority, but a high enough priority that you can continue working on this, because you can let it slip in 3 months, 6 weeks, 4 weeks can really delay a project and cause huge problems for what you're doing. If you're like me, we have to report to C-suite. They're not happy when your timelines start to drift, and they will drift very quickly. That's another reason why to have an RPO, because we're going to hold you to task on the schedules that we worked on. The SSV and documentation, Fernando, I don't want to keep putting words.
No, you're fine.
I watch you do presentation, but I mean, one of the biggest gaps we see is documentation.
Yep.
Maybe you could opine on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, to touch on your point earlier on companies not pushing forward with CMMC, we jokingly say CMMC is a lot like the 5 stages of grief. There's a lot of like denial at first. CMMC is never going to happen. Eventually we get into anger, and then eventually, right, we get around to acceptance. So kind of figure out which stage you're in right now. That being said, documentation, we actually had to do an adverse determination, meaning the company was not ready for assessment twice. First company, when they gave us all their documentation, the entire incident response control family was missing. And we said, well, maybe in the data dump, something got missed. We asked about it. They said, yeah, if we have an incident, we just open up a ticket. I'm like, right, but where's the plan? Where's the incident response plan? He's like, no, we just open up a ticket. That's all we do. I'm like, yeah, you're not ready. So we rescheduled them. And then we had another organization that had implementation control items listed in their plan of action and milestone document, still listed as open. And we asked them, what's going on with this? They said, no, we gave you the wrong document. We'll get it back to you by Friday, end of the next week. Friday came and went. We never received it. So that told us right then and there were still controls that had not been implemented. So we rescheduled them. So to Greg's point, documentation is huge. They can literally sync your entire assessment.
And of course, the SSP comes out of that. And Dan did a good job of describing that effort to scope and how important that is. And then change management. I'll say it again, change management is often neglected by organizations. So you write that scope, you write that SSP, you write your policies, and then you do changes to the systems and add or remove, and you don't accommodate for that. What's going to happen, Fernando?
Not pass go.
Do not pass go. Probably lose your compliance if you're not managing change properly.
Yep.
So all of those things are what RPOs can do for you and help you along this road. There's another bullet up there, but it doesn't matter. The road here, as I mentioned at the last slide, get started, be working on it. And it's a never ending road. See, it goes off into the horizon there with no real stop. And if you're just looking at it now or taking it seriously now, you've got 9 months. I could tell you, unless you're a tiny environment, even if you build your enclave, which we just did for a customer, help them build the enclave, well-defined SRM. It was the GRC tool. They actually had one, which is another thing. So governance, risk, and compliance tools, there may be some vendors here. I'm not going to mention specific names. You're going to need a tool to manage this compliance. You can't do it on a worksheet and Word documents. You're going to have this tracked in a GRC tool. And that's oftentimes an expense that's not considered, especially for small organizations. But even the multinationals that may have a product like Drata, the corporate, but they don't have the provisioning right so that they can actually implement it with the domestic GRC team. So it's a useless tool. Now they've got to try to invest. That's actually something people neglect to think about. And we talk about right at the beginning. And I could go on about the gaps we see with the SSP and the cherry picking of control objectives. So you got let's just say 5 systems in your scope, and you got one that's got MFA. So you say, well, we got MFA. Fernando's team comes in and says, well, show us the MFA for the other 4 systems, and you don't have it. Bad things happen. Yep. So that's a long road. RPOs are here to help. It really is a unique thing that the ecosystem was created in this way. But I think as we see more and more, especially with 48 coming, you're going to see more interest in having help that would come from an organization like TACO.
And I will say, if you guys think that 800.171 Rev 2 is difficult, wait till you get a load of 800.171 Rev 3. Because it goes from 110 controls to 320 assessment objectives in Rev 2 to Rev 3 going to 98 controls and 445 assessment objectives. So you're looking at about a 30% increase in work.
But, after all that Debbie Downer stuff, but the real objective, it's like anything else, is to get muscle memory in your organization. Because you're not done. When you make this path and you get that L2 certificate, the day after, you better be working on what you're going to do 3 years from now, because you're going to get this done every 3 years.
Yep.
And I'm sure everybody in this room knows that after a week, your system has evolved. Your system has changed. Your system is doing things that it wasn't doing a week ago. Maybe it's because somebody is not doing what they're supposed to do, not paying attention to what needs to be paid attention to, whatever it is. So you got to feed that animal on a daily basis. You got to make sure everything is going smooth. Because if you wait at 2.5 years and try to get everything back up to premier capability, and remember, your executive, someone with signature authority, at the end of each year needs to sign that we are keeping up with this capability. If you're not, and they find out something's wrong, then you're subject to the False Claims Act. And you know the False Claims Act usually is initiated by a whistleblower. Why? Because they got a pretty good financial incentive, if they can get through the pain, to turn you in, tell you you're not doing what you say you're doing, and then it has to go through a legal process. But the benefit to them, if that goes well, is very lucrative. So it's easier, in my mind, and again, I spent at least 10 to 15 years living under FSMA assessments. It's easier to feed this beast on a daily basis, to make sure everybody's doing do drills. I got to listen, I'm an old pump kicker from the Merchant Marine Academy, but I knew what cables I could pull to set an alarm and not kill my system and get everybody moving and doing what they needed to do. And maybe that was good for me. I mean, I was a systems guy. Everything from the steam system to the electrical system to making sure the captain's toilet flushed when he needed it. I mean, I knew the flow of everything on the ship I needed to know. And that transferred very well, and I don't see this any different. It's just ones and zeros. It doesn't matter whether it's oil or water, whatever's flowing through the system. In this case, it's very sensitive data. So I have a couple of pages of questions, although I want to get your questions answered. So please, if you can, stand up, give us your question, and try to say, what should I be doing if? What do I should expect? We don't need questions about, is this coming? OMB's got it on their desk. The ink isn't dry yet, but the ink is about ready to be pushed out. Anybody?
Willie, he's got.
Thank you. Question: why is, maybe I missed it earlier, but why is everything about protecting, controlling classified information? Why isn't it with classified information, or am I just misreading?
Well, there's
that?
already an industrial security manual that's very mature. And let me give you a story. When I had my organization, my company, we had a top secret clearance. We lived under the industrial security manual. We had top secret, secret, and confidential. Somebody in the Pentagon had a brainstorm, and maybe it was federal government, and said, well, we don't need confidential anymore. We're going to get rid of confidential. We're not going to do confidential vetting of people. We're not going to mark things. And there was still some legacy stuff. But all this data then got thrown into the wild. And we started calling it sensitive but unclassified information. But there was no manual that said what it was. Really, the rule about sensitive unclassified information was the program manager can decide what what sensitive but unclassified information they held. So I was in the DoD PKI program. I was also in the GSA government-wide program, and we built my company was the systems integrator for the initial DoD PKI, and then we built the external certificate authority. We were the first external certificate authority. And we were paid by the government to walk through different agencies in the DoD and help them protect their sensitive but unclassified information by accepting external certificate authorities and the CAC card. Of course, the CAC card had a lot of problems. I didn't like that they put it on a smart card because nobody had a smart card reader for the first 5 to 7 years of its life, but that's a different story. I would go to the people who were in charge of these programs, and I said, I got a contract, I'm getting paid, no cost to you, I'm going to help you implement your CAC, implement your external certificate authority so that you can protect sensitive but unclassified information. The first answer I got back was, well, we don't have any sensitive unclassified information. Sir, that's impossible. All the stuff that was let out in the wild, FOUO, whatever, all of this stuff, it's sensitive, it's unclassified, and it needs to be protected. No, we don't have any. You know why? Because the rule says I determine what it is. And I'm determining I don't have any sensitive but unclassified information. Well, it took 20 years for someone in the DoD to say, hey, we got all this stuff just floating around. It's all over the place. And the Chinese are eating our lunch. Russians are doing a pretty good job of that too. Even the North Koreans, what are we going to do about it? And this was like 7 years ago. So somebody created CUI as a term. Now, why did they, I don't know why they changed the wording. The one thing the government does very well is periodically, and almost every year, change the name of things, as if that's going to accelerate how we implement things. That doesn't work. So we're at a point now where we cannot take the beating we are getting. We can't get it from the DoD perspective, and believe me, we can't go from the DIB perspective, because if this goes much worse than it is, and all of our IP, I mean, I did a job about 5 years ago for Texas A&M. I didn't know it at the time. I spent a lot of time with the DIB. I didn't know a lot about research in universities and colleges. And there was a consortium of universities, and we were implementing some security controls at Texas A&M. Why? They were trying to build a data center. Why? Because they had people that had government research projects that had the server under the professor's desk on his own network. Would anybody have access to it? They had people who they knew were in the Chinese military who were just coming into the university, shaking the hand of the professor, saying, I really like what you're doing. I'd like to work with you. And they would never ask if they were really a student or if they had anything to do with the university. And they were just so glad somebody was interested in their research that they would walk in with USB tokens, and that stuff didn't take 30 seconds to get to China. That's what we're fighting. It's I guess, a little bit of ignorance, maybe a little bit of arrogance, but we're fighting that. And it's not only the universities, it's all over the place. When I had my company, I grabbed it very quickly, but I had an employee that was repurposing work we were doing for the government. And it only happened a short while, and I called I think it was the Navy Investigative Service, and they took care of this guy. But the audacity, 5 years later, I got a call from DIS that I was asked as a reference for his top secret clearance. Guess how far that went? Sir.
So in the Army, we have a lot of subcontractors that we use, particularly CETA contractors, where they tend to be like one-man shops. What options do these smaller organizations have with becoming CMMC compliant?
Yeah, so kind of the backstory to what Dan was talking about is back in 2019, there was a breach, and the contractor at the time had told the government that they were meeting compliance. The DOD sent out the DOD Inspector General to go check on 9 companies. How many of them do you think implemented the requirements? 0. That's why later on that year in December of 2019, they came out with the fiscal year NDAA 2020. Section 1648 established that the DOD established a third-party verification program because contractors were attesting to the government that they were maintaining compliance when they signed that contract. So when it comes to contractors, they've already attested to the government they've implemented these requirements. So in the eyes of the DOD, the only thing that the contractor should be paying for is the cost of the assessment. But that's not what contractors are complaining about. They're complaining about the implementation costs. 2 separate costs, and it's all over the rule. When you actually go in there and read it, they actually pull sections from DFAR 7012 where it states the contractor shall implement NIST 800-171 no later than December 31st, 2017.
So directly to your question, I'm a one-man shop. My wife owns the company, so I'm a one-man shop. Listen, you can go into one of the FedRAMP clouds, a little bit more money than you, but remember what you're dealing with. That's why it's so important to know what data you have. If you have just vanilla CUI, FedRAMP moderate is fine, right? If you're going into CTI and some
export control,
export control, you need high. But try to do things in an environment that's ready for you to do them, and there might be a little bit more. But remember, and I know this is a oh yeah, right, but this is an ODC, so you can add it to your overhead. Now, people say, well, does that make you competitive? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, most of the one-man shops, it's almost sole source anyhow, right? And I think you can make a case of that. But even for a little bit bigger organizations, I think in the early days, what you're going to find is, like the guy that he talked about that pulled out, I'm not going to do this kind of work. I think there's going to be an easy case for adding some of these costs, a good amount of these costs, into your ODCs. And you won't recover it right away, but you'll recover it over time. And the other thing is, again, it's not just, in my mind anyhow, it's not don't think of it as just doing what the DoD is telling you do. Think of it as what you're doing for your own cyber hygiene, what you're doing for your children and your grandchildren. It's important. It's one of the biggest problems we have today.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I agree. I think this is very important. I also think that having been on both sides of the house, on the military side and on the industry side, I think it's important that DOD somehow or another builds these costs in to help pay for this. And I don't know if you're doing it now, because saying you go out implement it in the Army in October, have they built that cost in that's the extra cost for the contractors? And I was a part of JWICS, which I thought was really great. We were really helping the contracting community, trying to move things along and trying to build it. By the time I got in industry and looked at this, we had built so much bureaucracy into it, it wasn't even funny. And for the poor contractors out there, I really felt for them after I thought I'd done such a good job of helping them out. So the bureaucracy, and we need to really watch that as we build this up. Again, Dan, thank you. Fernando, Greg, appreciate everything. And let's give them a big round of applause.
Well, thank you all for spending an hour with us. We're going to be in the hallways. Please ask questions. This is very important. We're very passionate. This is us trying to give back to the community. Thank you.